Beauty is truth and truth beauty.
I think so. I think so.
Hey, Chris, will you please read some poems?
You know, I never heard that line during the week. You never said Rudy Toot? That would have been...
Chris, how did you choose the poets?
Well, I knew that when I first started thinking about this, I knew Marvin was my first choice because of segues, and I knew that he would. I mean, I've known Marvin and been friends with him for 25 years, and there has never come a moment where I haven't thrown out an idea that he said, "Well, let's try it," you know. So I thought I wanted to have work with poets who it seemed to me would be open to trying something that, you know, could go nowhere, and so so I asked Marvin, I asked Dean, and Tomaz was an Ida Beam professor for us that week, so we knew we would have him in residence. And then that fall, I was watching to see which of the IWP poets might be willing to embark on such a journey. So, and I remember the time early in that residency, I was running down, taking my dog for a run down Riverside, and I saw Istvan, and I knew he'd been at the music building practicing piano. He's also a great classical pianist, and I said, but I could see he was walking away from the Iowa House where all the writers were staying, and I said, Istvan, are you trying to get back to the Iowa House? Because I had a feeling you might be lost. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, you're not really, you're going in the wrong direction. You have to be going this way. And we kept talking about it, and eventually it came out that he didn't want to walk across the footbridge. And I thought, oh, this is great. I get it. And you know, and then we had a long talk about that, and I thought, somebody that willing to speak that openly about it, I thought he'll be great this week. You know, I mean, because in a way you were saying, all right, I'll make myself vulnerable, and then we'll just see what happens.
Go ahead, read.
Okay, let me read from another part of the poem. Here's from Ksenia. Think now that wind comes saying, will you follow me? This comes to mind because it was about following things to see where they go. Think now that wind comes saying, will you follow me? Touches what remains of your body, a dead cricket in unknown arms. Sad children love dead things, feud for dead things do not hurt. So that wind comes, half your desire, as if to put you in the book where nothing's written but the sounds of pages turned by wind. Will you follow me? Through deserted streets of Moscow and Budapest and London, those cities, thieves of hope, the quicksilver of time, trembling of old heart, and then perhaps unite once I turn. So it was great. And, you know, Ksenia also was going, she was moving from Russian into English and sometimes English into Russian. And I think she began some poems in Russian and finished them in English and then back and forth. And that too was kind of a fun thing. There's a poem in here at some point where Tomaz refers to her as the Russian girl, and you know, things would just get picked up along the way. Maybe there are other questions too.
Somebody got a question? Vic doesn't get to ask all the questions. Come on.
I do have more questions.
Oh, Sarah has one. You have to talk into your mic.
It's not working.
Oh, come on up here.
Yeah.
Come on up here.
The other question, whoops. So the other question I had was, you did it from 1 to 3. So did a bell go off at 3 and everybody get up from the table, or did you? How did the days? Did you go over many hours sometimes?
Oh, we never went over. These are poets. No, I think we went up to around the time, but by the end, I think by the end of 2 hours of working pretty hard, we were pretty tired. And so, but it was you know, banker's hours, 1 to 3, without the martinis. You know? Yeah.
I'm just curious, after this, like, pressure cooker kind of composition process, if on your own now you introduce restraints this way, just for personal, you know, poems that you write in day to day.
The question is, after having done this experiment, do we introduce restraints into our own work? You mean formal restraints, or
no?
What do you
like
mean?
these like stopwatch kind of things, or free writing?
To write by stopwatch? I never do. Marvin, do you? Is that you have a stopwatch when you write?
No. I told you, I usually write very late at night, and there's a point in which my brain isn't working, I'm just out of it, and so then I have to get up and leave. I stop, when the energy flags, I stop writing, which means I lose a lot, because I may come back to something and I can't get back into it. But that's the way I prefer to write. I mean, to me that means more than setting out a plan for accomplishment.
If there had been another word other than union, were there any other words you would have considered?
Oh, what a great question. Were there any other words besides union? And it's funny because when we sold the book to Trinity University Press, I said, well, we'll call it Union. And they said, oh, that's not very catchy. So we went through a lot of titles along the way, and I said, yeah, but it's all about union. I remember arguing with the editor about this, and she was the one who came up with, I think, a pretty good title, 741, which I like to refer to as the 747 without wings or wheels. And but had there been another word, I don't know what we would have done. I didn't have one. I was feeding off of Mike Finn's idea for the plays. I should say one story about the plays, which I've always loved, is that I mean, part of me never imagined that all 14 playwrights would write the plays that they wrote, and then I don't know why I didn't think of this, but we actually had asked an Iranian playwright to write, and I guess I just assumed that it wasn't going to happen. And when that play arrived in Farsi on Monday morning, and of course I had no Farsi translator, I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then I suddenly thought, that's right, there's a great Iranian-American poet named Sholeh Volpe. I'll write to her. I'll send her an email. And I said, Sholeh, here's the jam I'm in. And she wrote back an email, and she said, well, I'm on a book tour, and I'm at lunch right now, but between lunch and dinner I can translate this, but you really owe me. And the play was just terrific. And I think it's, again, that spirit. I mean, we just sort of enter into this common enterprise. But maybe you'll come up with a word for your own one for something else. Jim, you had a...
Well, would you talk a little bit about the translation? Did each poet translate his or her own poem, and did you help, or how did that change the poems?
The question is about who did the translations, and that day the translations were done by each of the poets, and they were, of course, of varying quality at the time. When I've translated with Tomaz in the past, we have worked with his English crib, and then a faithful French translation, which gives me a better sense of what's going on, and then a lot of conversation between us. In this case, we had time for a spot translation, and after all of it was done, each of the poets worked with some of the regular translators to get to polish them a lot for the final book, and that was crucial to the endeavor.
How much revision was allowed in the process?
Well, I mean, in theory, anybody could. The question is how much revision was allowed, and in theory, anybody could translate it, revise as much as they wanted, and in practice, I think people revised almost not at all. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think maybe just a word or two here, and then there were little words here in the translations. Yeah. So it's what you see is what happened that day. Yeah.
Between the rough translation and then the final translation, was there anything that came out in someone else's poems that you were like, oh, I wish that I had been able to get that when we were actually sitting down doing the...
Oh, a wonderful question. Between the rough translation and the final translation, did something wonderful happen that we wished had gone into the final, the poems at the time? Well, I was the one doing the editing, so it never occurred to me because I was just trying to think how to get these poems into some order. But I imagine that, part of what was happening, people were reading the poems aloud and we were writing down the lines and phrases that we either heard or didn't hear. So if we'd gotten it right, it probably wouldn't have changed anything. It just would have gone in a different direction that would have led to opening up ever more interesting vistas.